Just stay down, loser. The words, sharp and cold, slithered through the crowded hallway of Northwood High, a place that smelled of old books, industrial cleaner, and the faint, metallic tang of insecurity. They were directed at a girl hunched over her spilled backpack, a chaotic splash of textbooks, pens, and a single, worn-out notebook against the grimy linoleum floor. This was Maya, her first day, her new beginning that was already crumbling into dust at her feet. She didn't look up. She kept her eyes fixed on the scattered contents of her life, her long, dark hair curtaining her face, a makeshift shield against the smirks and pointed fingers. The command had come from Troy, a senior whose broad shoulders filled out a varsity jacket emblazoned with a roaring wildcat. He was flanked by his girlfriend, Chloe, and their friend, Mark, a trio of royalty in the brutal ecosystem of Northwood High. Troy's foot, large and clad in an expensive-looking sneaker, came to rest squarely on top of Maya's history textbook, pinning it and her in place. This is it. Maya's thoughts were a frantic, silent scream. This is what Mom promised would be a fresh start. Her chest felt tight, a familiar cage of anxiety tightening around her ribs. Her hands, trembling slightly, hovered over a stray pen. Every instinct screamed at her to react, to move, to do something. But a deeper, more disciplined instinct held her still. Control the breath. Assess the threat. Do not escalate. The mantra drilled into her over countless hours on the mats was a lifeline in this sea of adolescent cruelty. She saw the situation not as a personal insult, but as a technical problem. Troy was the aggressor. He was off balance, leaning forward, his weight committed. A simple ankle pick or a sweep of the supporting leg would have him on the ground before he could blink. But that would be a victory of violence, and Sensei Ishii's voice echoed in her mind, Jiu-Jitsu is not for proving strength. It is for preserving peace. The fight you avoid is the fight you win. Oops, Chloe said, her voice a saccharine drip. She nudged a binder with the toe of her boot, scattering loose, leaf paper like fallen leaves. Looks like you're a little clumsy, new girl. A tedder of laughter rippled through the gathering crowd. They were spectators to a public execution of dignity, and Maya was the main event. Chloe, with her perfectly styled blonde hair and a confidence that came from a lifetime of being the prettiest girl in any room, fed on this dynamic. She was the queen, and Maya was a peasant who had accidentally stumbled into the royal court. Maya's emotions were a storm she fought to contain. Humiliation burned hot in her cheeks. A raw, primal fear chilled her spine. But beneath it all, simmering like a dormant volcano, was a flicker of something else. Not anger, not yet. It was a cold, sharp recognition. She knew this dynamic. She understood the language of dominance and submission. It was, in its own twisted way, a form of combat. The hallway was her dojo, and these were untrained, reckless opponents. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to drain all the fight out of her, she looked up. Her eyes, a startling shade of hazel, met Troy's. They weren't pleading. They weren't even scared. They were empty, calm. "Can I have my book back?" she asked, her voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, forcing the surrounding students to lean in to hear. Troy smirked, a flash of white teeth against a perpetually tanned face. He applied more pressure, the textbook cover groaning in protest. What's the magic word? This was his arena, his domain. As the starting quarterback, he was used to commanding the field, to having every move watched and admired. This shy, mousy new girl was beneath his notice, yet she presented a perfect opportunity to reinforce his status. Pushing her down was as natural to him as calling an audible at the line of scrimmage. Before Maya could answer, a voice cut through the tension. "Hey, come on, man. Leave her alone." It was a boy named Jake, tall and lanky with kind eyes that seemed out of place in the hallway's predatory atmosphere. He was on the periphery of Troy's social circle by virtue of being on the basketball team, but never quite in it. He carried a quiet intelligence that often made him the voice of reason, a role that frequently isolated him from the pack mentality. Troy's gaze flickered to Jake, unimpressed. "Got a thing for strays, Matthews." Jake's jaw tightened, but he didn't back down. He simply bent down and started gathering Maya's scattered papers. It was a small act of rebellion, but in the hierarchy of Northwood, it was significant. Maya watched him, a tiny, almost imperceptible crack forming in the icy fortress around her heart. Gratitude. It was a dangerous emotion here. Troy, bored with the lack of a more dramatic reaction, finally lifted his foot with a contemptuous snort. "Whatever. Don't block the hallway tomorrow." He turned, his court following him, their laughter echoing like gunshots long after they'd rounded the corner. The crowd dispersed, the show over. Maya was left on the floor with Jake, who was carefully stacking her papers. "Don't mind them," he said, not looking at her. "Troy's the quarterback. Chloe's dad basically owns the town. They think they own the air we breathe." The Maya finally moved, her hands steady now as she helped him. "Thanks," she murmured, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. "No problem." He handed her the last of her pens and their fingers brushed, a simple human contact. "I'm Jake, Maya." She managed a small, fragile smile. It felt foreign on her face. "Welcome to Northwood," he said, and the way he said it sounded less like a greeting and more like a warning. The days bled into a week, then two. Maya's life became a carefully choreographed routine of invisibility. She navigated the halls with her head down, a ghost in a world of vibrant, loud colors. She ate lunch alone in the farthest corner of the library, tucked away between stacks of forgotten literature. But her attempts at anonymity were futile. Troy, Chloe, and Mark had marked her. She was their new favorite game. It was a relentless, low-grade campaign of psychological warfare. A trip in the cafeteria that sent her tray of food clattering to the floor, a viscous river of gravy and mashed potatoes. A series of cruel memes photoshopped with her face, shared across social media with the hashtag #SadNewGirl. Whispers that followed her like a toxic fog. "I heard her family's in witness protection." "No, I heard she got kicked out of her last school for fighting." Each incident was a small cut, and Maya bled internally. She would come home to the small, rented house on the edge of town, the one her mother had chosen for its good school district, and retreat to her room. Her mother, Lena, working double shifts as a nurse, would see the shadows under her daughter's eyes and feel a familiar, helpless dread. "Just give it time, sweetheart," she'd say, her voice thick with exhaustion and guilt. "Kids can be cruel. You just have to be stronger." Lena saw the quiet, withdrawn girl her daughter had become since the move, and she blamed herself for uprooting their lives, for believing the brochures about Northwood High's inclusive community. Maya would just nod, swallowing the words that wanted to erupt. "I am stronger, Mom. You have no idea how strong I am." But she couldn't tell her. The Jiu-Jitsu, the black belt she'd earned at 16 under the stern but loving eye of Sensei Ishii in their old city, was a part of her life her mother had never fully understood. To Lena, it was a hobby, a quirky self-defense class. She didn't grasp the philosophy, the discipline, the way it had rewired Maya's very soul. It was a secret garden Maya retreated to, a place where she had control, where her body and mind were one fluid, powerful instrument. In her room, she would sometimes run through cadence, her movements silent and precise, a meditation in motion that grounded her, reminding her of who she was beneath the shy new girl exterior. Her only solace, besides the silent sanctuary of her room, was her occasional, hesitant interactions with Jake. He'd nod to her in the hallways. Once, he sat with her in the library for a full 10 minutes before being summoned by his basketball teammates. He was a flicker of decency in the gloom. He tried to talk to Troy to reason with him. "Dude, it's not funny anymore. Just let it go." Troy had just laughed, clapping Jake on the back with a force that was just a little too hard. "Relax, Matthews. We're just having fun. She's a nobody. She doesn't even react. It's like picking on a ghost." But the escalation was inevitable. The psychological torment needed a physical climax. It happened on a Friday in the gymnasium. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and varnished wood. The entire school was gathered for a pep rally, a deafening spectacle of school spirit that felt like a mockery to Maya. The cheerleaders, with Chloe at the front, executed perfect flips, their smiles wide and plastic. The band played a fight song with brassy enthusiasm. Troy stood at the center of the basketball team, the unspoken king basking in the adulation. Maya felt like an anthropologist, studying a strange and hostile tribe from the highest bleacher. She was trying to slip out early to avoid the crowd, when Chloe and her friends cornered her near the bottom of the bleachers. "Well, look who's trying to skip out on supporting our team," Chloe purred, her eyes glinting with malicious delight. "Don't you have any school spirit, Maya? Or are you just too good for us?" The girls, with her usual courtiers, giggled on cue. Maya tried to step around her. "I just want to go home." Her voice was low, but a new note had entered it, a thread of steel. The patience she had cultivated was wearing thin, the reservoir of her restraint nearing empty. A hand shot out, shoving her back. It was Mark, his face a mask of stupid aggression. She didn't say you could leave. The shove was hard, unexpected. Maya stumbled back, her bag dropping from her shoulder. The crowd around them, sensing blood in the water, began to form a loose circle. This was becoming a pattern, a public spectacle, a hunt. Jake, from across the gym, saw the commotion and started pushing his way through the throng of students, his heart hammering against his ribs. Breathe, center yourself. They are off balance. They are emotional. You are not. The thoughts were automatic, a calming cascade in her mind. Her body settled into a subtle, ready stance, her weight distributed evenly on the balls of her feet. She was no longer looking at the floor. Her gaze was up, scanning, assessing. Chloe the instigator. Mark the brute. And now here came Troy sauntering over, drawn by the promise of a better show. Please, Maya said, her voice low but clear, cutting through the buzz of the crowd. Just let me go. It was a final warning, spoken in a language they were incapable of understanding. Or what? Troy said, emerging from the crowd. He was in his element, the center of attention. He walked up to her, standing so close she could smell his cheap cologne. You gonna cry? Go ahead, do it. He puffed out his chest, playing to his audience. This was his performance, his demonstration of power. He reached out and gave her a hard, two-handed shove to the chest. It was the mistake he didn't know he was making. The shove was aggressive, committed. It gave her everything she needed. As his hands made contact with her sternum, Maya's body became water. She didn't resist the push, she accepted it, flowed with it, using his own forward momentum against him. Her left foot pivoted back as her right hand shot up, grabbing the wrist of his pushing hand. It was a single, fluid motion, too fast for the eye to fully comprehend. In the space of a single heartbeat, she had turned, ducked under his arm, and positioned his body over her shoulders. The classic kuzushi, the breaking of balance, was absolute. In one breathtaking, silent moment, the world turned upside down for Troy Bolton. Maya dropped her weight, pivoted her hips, and executed a perfect epon sue nage, a one-armed shoulder throw. There was a collective, sharp intake of breath from the entire gymnasium. The roaring cheers for the pep rally died in an instant, replaced by a stunned, deafening silence. Troy, the 180-pound star quarterback, was launched over Maya's shoulder. He sailed through the air for a moment, a look of pure, uncomprehending shock on his face, before he landed flat on his back on the polished gym floor with a thunderous, hollow thbump that echoed through the sudden quiet. He lay there, gasping, the wind utterly knocked out of him, staring at the distant rafters as if he'd just fallen from the sky. Maya stood over him, her breathing even, her expression not one of triumph, but of cold, detached finality. She wasn't even looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on Chloe and Mark, who stood frozen, their mouths agape, all color drained from their faces. The performance was over. The queen and her jester were stunned into silence. The silence was broken by a single, slow clap. It was Jake standing at the edge of the circle, a look of awe and vindication on his face. Then another person clapped, and another. It wasn't a roar of applause. It was a wave of stunned, respectful acknowledgement that spread through the student body. The spell was broken. The invisible hierarchy had been visibly, physically shattered. Maya didn't wait for the teachers, who were now pushing their way through the crowd, their faces masks of alarm and confusion. She didn't say a word. She simply picked up her bag, slung it over her shoulder, and walked through the parted sea of students. Her head was high, her back straight. The ghost was gone. In her place was a warrior they never knew existed. The aftermath was a different kind of storm. A 3-day suspension for both of them. A furious principal. A lecture from a wary school resource officer. A disappointed mother who sat at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. Violence is never the answer, Maya. We talked about this. We were supposed to be starting over. But it wasn't violence, Mom, Maya said, her voice calm for the first time in weeks. It was self-defense. It was a choice. I could have done a lot worse. The truth of her words, the strange confidence with which she delivered them, gave her mother pause. Lena looked at her daughter, truly looked at her, and saw not a victim, but a young woman who possessed a depth of strength she had never recognized. But the story had already spread through the school, then the town, morphing into legend. The video, filmed on a dozen different phones, went viral within Northwood's social sphere. It was analyzed, slowed down, marveled at. The shy new girl was now the Northwood ninja. Memes were made, but this time they were memes of respect. GIFs of the throw were set to epic music. When Maya returned to school a week later, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The whispers were still there, but they were now tinged with fear, respect, and curiosity. Troy and his crew gave her a wide berth, their bravado shattered. The bullying didn't just stop, it evaporated, as if the very memory of it had been thrown on the gym floor and had the life knocked out of it. Troy walked the halls with a new, quieter demeanor. The throw had been a humbling of biblical proportions. He had been defeated not by a rival jock, but by the person he considered the weakest link, and the entire school had witnessed it. It forced an introspection he had never before encountered. Jake found her at her usual table in the library. "That was incredible," he said, sitting down without an invitation. Maya looked at him. For the first time, she didn't try to hide the strength in her eyes. "It was inevitable. You could have done that the first day in the hallway," he stated, more than asked. "Yes, why didn't you?" She considered this, looking out the window at the students milling about below. "Because knowing you can hurt someone and choosing not to is where real strength is." They didn't understand that. They forced the choice. She looked back at him. "My sensei taught me that Jiu-Jitsu is the art of yielding, of using an opponent's energy against them." In the hallway, their energy was just words and posturing. I could yield to that, absorb it. In the gym, it became physical. That energy had to be redirected. Jake nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. He saw her now, not as a victim or just a badass, but as a complex, deeply disciplined person. A friendship, tentative and real, began to blossom from the ashes of the ordeal. He started asking her genuine questions about her training, about the philosophy behind it. The story didn't end with Maya becoming the new popular girl. She didn't want that. It ended with her finding a quiet, hard-won peace. A few weeks later, with Jake's encouragement and after a surprisingly straightforward meeting with the principal, she started a Jiu-Jitsu club after school. Jake was her first member. So was a shy freshman named Eli who had been getting picked on by Mark's younger brother. So, eventually, was Mark himself, who sheepishly approached her one day after school, unable to meet her eyes. "My dad saw the video," he mumbled. "He said if I'm going to get thrown around, I should at least learn how it's done." Even Troy, months later, approached her as she was locking her locker before winter break. The halls were empty. "Look," he began, his voice low. "I was a jerk. A massive jerk. I'm sorry. It wasn't a grand, dramatic redemption. It was awkward and stilted. But it was real." Maya simply nodded. "Okay," she said, and in that single word, she granted him a forgiveness he knew he hadn't fully earned, but was grateful to receive. Maya had not just fought a bully. She had recalibrated the entire ecosystem of the school. She proved that the loudest voice isn't the strongest, and that true power is often silent, waiting in the shadows, disciplined and controlled. She found her voice not in screaming back, but in the quiet, devastating efficiency of a single, perfect throw. She went from being a target to becoming a legend. And then, finally, to just being Maya. She found the fresh start she was looking for. Not by running from who she was, but by finally, unapologetically, embracing the warrior within the quiet girl. So, I have to ask you, from which part of the country are you watching this video? Let me know in the comments below.